during that time, kind of the end of the 70s, that electronic feel started coming in, you know, what was your take on that?
Creaky chair, yeah. So the electronic thing, yeah. I mean, it's that thing is really spans the whole of the decade, really, because I mean, I chose not. I was trained to be a viola player in an orchestra, and at the beginning of the 70s, I turned down a chance to go to the Royal Academy of Music, and I joined a jazz rock band orientated band. So I learned how to improvise, but in some ways, when the punk thing came along, I actually agreed with that. In fact, we preempted it quite a bit with the Ultravox thing, you know, with vocal lines like "people like you should be put down," talking about hippies and just generally the lecturing sort of, because I suffered a little bit from that because I was slightly young for the hippie thing. So after a while, I got sick of being lectured to as regards improvisation. So we took that punk theme with us, you know. But it slightly hindered us because it had, as you probably know, it had such a stranglehold on it, on everything. And it actually caused Ultravox to eventually to not really get a proper say. So we're talking 77, 78 now, but we were going against the flow because we were just difficult bastards, really, and which I quite liked. So we were doing keyboard-orientated things right in the middle of the punk explosion, and going on stage and getting booed off but a lot of the time. But that's not necessarily really true because we did have quite a good live following. So we would do keyboard things, and I had a synthesizer as early as 1977, and we used to make up sparse, heavy drum tracks just from the synthesizer, you know, take all the release off and everything, and we were quite knocked out just by the power of all this. Because I mean, what was good about Ultravox was we would experiment, and that's what kept us all alive, really. You know, it was, even though we knew that we weren't selling many records.
Sure. Tell people now, have all this equipment here, it's, you know, near 1999. Electronic and synthesizers are just, you know, day to day. But tell us a little bit about how difficult it was to get those things to work, practically.
In those days?
In those days.
Yeah, well, the first one I got, which was the ARP Odyssey, I mean, it was, I just didn't bother learning how to play it. What I tended to do, it was, used to put these white, paper things over that would slot onto the notches properly, you know, and it'd tell you where to move these switches and all that, and these sliders. And I mean, that was interesting, and it helped me. It seemed more complicated than what it actually was. I mean, I'd go and do these gigs and think, oh, are all the switches in the right place, you know, and it was like, oh, God. And we used to finish, I can give you an example of them not being in the right place. We used to finish one track off, we used to do a violin solo, very, on a Fender violin, very, distorted, you know. And then we used to finish it off with a sound where you get it so it comes in right at the top and goes right down through the bottom, and people would be just like, shit, literally. And I had one switch, just one switch in the wrong position, and instead of it doing like that, it ended up doing what's called a sample and hold thing and made a sound, because I was using white noise. So it would go ding, 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 ding. So it did this silly musical thing, you know. I mean, that's how they could really make you look an absolute fool as well, you know. So instead of everybody going wow, they'd just piss themselves laughing. I mean, basically what I did, because I'm like a violin player, and the climate really influenced what we did. You were pushed around by the audience quite a bit. You're talking about a time when people were gobbing on you and generally having a swing at you, know, especially the keyboard player. No, it's true. I mean, it's hard to go back to that time. So what I tended to do was make a violin sound, bring it right down and simplify it. So I mean, I had two sounds. I had a sound which was a soft sound, like the middle section of Vienna later, so all nice and soft. Or I used to have one which was just a pierce and cut through, you know, and with vibrato on, and that, I think that came out of really just wanting to be heard, you know. It was like, you know, quite often I'd see bands on the keyboard, if they weren't playing like a Vox organ or something, like some of the bands at that time, like La Rugulator, which I thought were really good, you just wouldn't hear the keyboard player, so it was a bit of a deliberate intention of me to be heard.
Yeah,
You know,
sure.
and that eventually became the 80s Ultravox's sort of lead sound, you know. But it came really, I suppose, from being a violin player and a desire to cut through. But just to answer your question, you know, those things were precarious in those days. But I mean, they are now, really, to a certain extent, you know.
How did Brian Eno get involved in the first the Ultravox?
Well, we signed to Ireland. This was back in 1976. And, well, we really rated him. We liked Another Green World. And we were into Roxy music with him in it. No, we were into Roxy music, and that's how he came along. You know, he was. I think he was on Ireland himself. Yeah, he had the Obscure label or something, or some label.
And what was he like to work with? I mean, did he bring a lot of experience, influence, or?
Yeah, he did. I was a little bit suspicious that it might get a little bit too arty. That's an awful. He gave us a very good influence, but he did. I remember him doing something where he detuned my piano on one thing. Isn't it amazing how you have these memories? And it was eccentric, but it was an area that was probably a bit too eccentric for me, a bit too funny, because we were kind of hyped up kids. You know, it was like. But for me personally, he brought in a chance to use a proper synthesizer, because I hadn't used one before, which was really nice. I mean, it was brilliant. He was a very keen guy to work with, you know, using the Mini Moog. And I think, just thinking about that now as I'm saying that, the way it kind of annoyed me as well in some ways related to the keyboards, it's because he took it out of control a little bit. But I think what he was trying to do was put a bit of humour into us, and just to chill out a little bit, because I think he knew what we were going through. Because we were slightly against the tide even when we signed there, because he knew we were in the shadow of Roxy Music, because they'd just actually left that label. So it was quite good. He had these cards which he would use to prevent people from getting blocked in the studio. So you'd just choose these cards and it'd say like, piss off and have whatever, go and get fish and chips and have a chat, or just to try and loosen things up. So it was quite helpful then, because it was, but like it is a bit of a long time ago.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about those days on Ireland. You know, what was, like you're saying, punk was, I suppose, quite prevalent at the time.
It was. I mean, the Damned were there. They made it their home with Stiff, Dave Robinson. So. Yeah, we felt a bit like, hang on, we're the new boys, you know, and it was like, but are we? You know, it was a bit difficult, you know.
And what was it, you know, musically? What was your aims, direction? You know, particularly the first three albums.
Sounds a bit dumb to say, but I think it was just a constantly experiment. We'd made a conscious decision. We actually got the deal from doing pop tunes, because we really did that thing, making pop records. Steve Lillywhite, the producer, got us in at Phonogram Studios at downtime at the weekend. This is before we got the deal, and so we did the pop thing, and we actually made a conscious effort not to do it. We preferred the other stuff we were doing, and it was just to be schizoid, really. We got accused of being a schizoid, but it didn't work for us in the end, because I think if something so strong as punk wasn't around, it might have done, but there wasn't really room for a band that was like that. We wanted to cover all these areas. We wanted to do stuff that was like punk, and then suddenly go to something with acoustic guitar and violin, say, like we used to start the set like that, and then go over to drum machines. We wanted to experiment a lot, and John Foxx wanted to just use his voice in all kinds of different ways. I think really just open up and learn and try different things. We were a band that were reasonably old compared to the other bands, because we actually got together at end of 72, early 73. So when the punk thing came along, you can see how we kind of deliberately did our own thing. almost bloody-mindedly, you know. So that's what we wanted to achieve. But it was more than that. We aspired to the do-it-yourself thing of the punk thing, right from the beginning. And we were quite anti... I wasn't anti-improvisation because I liked the idea of an album to experiment. But I did subscribe a little bit to the fact that it was getting overblown before punk came along. We all did. And I was a little bit against the Americanization of it. I'm not anti-American. What I mean is, I didn't always have empathy towards R&B and blues scales, you know. But a rock and pop audience do, you know, i.e. the big hit by Human League is actually, you know, quite sort of bluesy. It's kind of flat and southern stuff we're talking, you know, bluesy sort of scales. And we wanted to just make our own kind of music. And to get that, we were drawing more... I mean, when I used to put classical chords in and stuff, instead of it being blanked, it was actually met with real positivity, you know. I mean, that's what was really good about Ultravox.
And in those island dates with John Foxx, who was the direction in the band? Who was, you know, pulling the strings, so to speak?
It was John's band. It was John's band, but like I say, he was open to influences. And he was very much of the kind of guy of working with what elements are in there and accepting them and letting them be. He wasn't like a dubious politics, but he wasn't an absolute control freak, which he may sort of tend to think. But let's face it, things did move over to the right quite a bit, didn't they, in the early 70s? And I, blowing my own trumpet here, did a lot of the writing out of that after him. But he came at the situation as a bit like a songwriter that was prepared to have it added to, shifted around, which was good. But there's more than one way to skin a cat. So that when I worked with, Visage or Ultravox, they were different. They were a group of writers, and we used to write things like a piece of music, and quite often the vocals went on last. I mean, that tended to suit me because I was you could just concentrate in writing a strong piece of music. It's got I'm waffling.
So, but how did you feel? I mean, you could almost say Ultravox was Ultravox Part 1, Ultravox Part 2 with John's departure. How did you feel when John left?
Gutted. No, disappointed, depressed, because this takes us right to almost like exactly 20 years ago, because our last gig in Britain was Christmas Eve 1978. We went on and did a short tour of the States early January. But we knew we were left. It was difficult. It was a bit drawn out because when you put so much into it, I think I was a bit childish, really. I was just gutted and probably blamed him for it, you know. But it didn't help that it was drawn out, because we ended up doing a tour in early January, the Miles Copeland thing. We were the second band to go over there. We used the Police's back line. We went after Squeeze, and it was too good not to do. And it was a bit of a bad atmosphere, because we knew that John was quitting, and I think he was quite hurt about it just not happening, you know. So it was definitely going to be a clean break. He wanted to just get away from the band. But it was really peculiar. I mean, it wasn't a downer, because it was quite bizarre, because the moment we'd finished the last gig, which was this guy called Richard Griffiths, which is still in the business. He took us under his wing a bit. He was working at Ireland, and he organised the American tour, and he also organised us for us to play at the Marquee. We were always playing at the Marquee. God, you know, we did records there. There's thousands of people packed in the place. You know, we did 5 nights there before we played the Reading Festival. We supported the Jam. This was 1978. We were like from great heights, supported Jam at Reading Festival, to suddenly being off the label. Now, it's quite bizarre, because when we finished the gig there, I remember Richard Griffiths giving us this like £100, and it was like... And Rusty Egan, he was there, and he said, come round to our club. You know, do you want to come to this club? There's a club around the corner. Of course we want to come to a club, you know, we're depressed and we've got £100, you know, something. So we went round there, and really that was the start of the the Blitz period. That was the one before the Blitz, this club called Billy's Club. And we just picked ourselves up. I mean, it was just actually bizarre. Me and Robin Simon, this is a guitarist I brought into Ultravox for the Systems of Romance album. He was in, and then next minute we were kicked off the label. So there's me and him went round there to drown our sorrows. I remember drinking these blue drinks until we were absolutely completely blottoed. And but the main thing was that we went round there and we heard Rusty Egan playing Quiet Man. So it was like from a major downer to like, oh, this is quite. It's just nice to hear it, because we were just all, it was all live at that time. And suddenly to find yourself in a club, that was like, oh, this is kind of interesting. It's fun, basically. It's light. It was like he was going against the flow. So we, Andy said he liked Systems of Romance, so he was my friend. Now, he was going against the flow. It was like saying hands up. You know, not everything was crap. You know, we liked Bowie. There's Kraftwerk. So there was obviously a new scene. You know, he'd actually been dealt the same blow as us in retrospect. He'd just been kicked off EMI because he was in the Rich Kids, and that didn't happen. And just to probably moving on a bit too much, I mean, the guys that he brought in to do Visage, they'd just been dealt the same kind of blow as us. Magazine, they'd just done the correct use of soap, and I mean, I knew those guys. We'd passed them in Germany when we were touring and blah blah blah. So they'd basically we'd all drew the short straw, but we were going to do something about it. You know, we weren't sort of finished.
When Alan dropped you after that gig and you went into Billy's, did you think that there's a new scene right here? Did it immediately hit you? Or
not immediately, no. I mean, the drinks did. This blue drink. Not straight away. I mean, I was quite cynical by then. I was quite gutted by the whole thing, because there's a lot of people saying how much they like Systems of Romance. I mean, when I did the Gary Newman tour early on that year, and I remember playing in Bristol, and the Simple Minds were there, and they invited me down to their room, and they were playing Systems of Romance. It was embarrassing. It was great. They liked it, you know, and that was a hell of a boost. But it was also a bit irritating. It was like, oh, do you like a loser? Now, it's easy to say to someone who's just been kicked off the label, would they say that if it was number 2 in the charts? God, I am a cynic. No, but you're a bit like that. I just didn't want to know about it, you know. And even when people would ask me about, it was great, but I was actually more interested in doing something new. Yeah. So when Rusty started talking about maybe a band, well, of course, I met Midge then as well. He'd start asking about Ultravox, and I wouldn't answer at that time. I was really screwed up about it, you know. It was like, oh, don't talk about it, you know, because it was heavy, you know.
So when so that whole period, do you think Arlen dropped you purely because John left, or what was that?
No, I don't think it was that. I think it was they dropped us because we didn't get in the top 40.
And why do you think John left?
Because he blamed us. I don't know. I actually cancelled that, really. I'm just being a laugh. Yeah. It's a laugh. I haven't got a bloody clue. It was a hard, bitter pill to swallow, you know, because it was difficult for us. I mean, I realised all sorts of things then. I was gaining experience fast, and I realised for the guy whose band it was to get slagged off good and proper, because we were a perfect target. You know, like our first thing, they accused us of being... it was heavy going for John. He took it quite personal. Well, I just think he'd had enough. He wanted to... You know, when you get things like ultra hype, and you can do a lot of things with ultra, can't you? You know, ultra crap, you know. I think he just wanted to get the baggage off, and probably, I don't really know. I think he was wanting to do something... I think he realised that the areas that we were covering weren't actually sharp enough for that particular moment in time. And I think he was probably foreseeing what was going to happen with the likes of Depeche Mode and Human League, them doing something extreme, i.e. actually dare to not have a band without a guitar in, or not to have real drums, you know. I think he was thinking more like that, because he'd probably been thinking like that. Every time we did things like Hiroshima Mon Amour, which was dead simple, keyboards and a drum machine, we did it in like an afternoon. He came in just like this, did it in a few hours. You could see he was much more excited with technology stuff. So he went in that direction.
Sure.
I was still quite into a band. I would still like to pursue these areas of drums because I like drums. I just didn't see that you had to kick, just because the drum machine came along, I didn't see why you'd have to get rid of the drums, you know.
Sure.
Big mistake.
What about, you said a minute ago, it was, you know, Ultravox, you know, they were John's band.
Yeah, they were, yeah.
Why did you keep why did the name Ultravox survive?
Why did we keep it? Well, I think because I'd had such a big part in creating the music it was, and I felt that that music, the identity we'd created with me and the other two guys, Chris Cross and Warren Cann, could carry on. So, you know, simple as that.
And after that,
God, I haven't answered that one for a while. No, it really did feel like it was our thing, and it was fine too. I think at the time, you know, to be brutally honest, I may have had a few pangs of like, should or shouldn't I? But I think by the time I'd cleared the air and done something different, like done half of the Visage album in 1979, by the time we got together with Midge in August of that year, it seemed okay too, you know. We still had a lot of legal problems hanging around us. I mean, I had a few. There's dreadful things that musicians get, you know. But it was okay to use Ultravox.
So how did the I'm just jumping around a little bit, but tell us a little bit about those days. So I guess, you know, 78, 79. You were moving around a lot, different bands. You know, Tube Army, Visage. Just run through, you know, just researching it, but it was hard work working out where you were when. What
I was up to, yeah. Well, I mean, really from that point, things started to happen. Like I said, we went to the States, but that was a bit depressing. Brilliant, but depressing because it was quite tense between us there, you know, John and the band. So we knew we were all going to, when we came back. But things started happening for me straight away. This talk about getting Visage together. I auditioned. It was a case of like, come on, get off your backside, you know, you've got to get something going now, you know. I auditioned for a couple of bands. Who was that guy who's done the football anthem? The guy that has a lot of...
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, I was going to do a band with him. And, you know what I mean, it was just as a lot, Lightning Seeds.
Yeah.
And Ian Brody, I mean, to think about it now, you know.
What was his band called again?
Lightning Seeds, yeah, now. I was going to try to band with him with the original Mirrors, yeah, which was a guy from Deaf School as well. And so I got around a bit. I just didn't do Visage. And I also was going to do an audition for this punk poet. Oh, I can't bloody remember now. So it was a case of, come on, you know, I was going for it. And but it was funny with the Ian Brody thing. He said, look, we've got this piece like this. And I'm going, oh, that sounds familiar. It's Quiet Man, you know. No. It was like just exactly like one of ours. So I'm not. Sounds like I'm being a bit of a so-and-so here, but it was like, hang on a minute, people are actually on to what we were doing. So it was a bit like that. Yeah, what happened? Yeah, I remember going to Scene magazine at Drury Lane, and a very shy Gary Newman came up and introduced himself to me and said, would you be up for doing this tour with me, you know? And yeah, I went to do some rehearsing, and that was good. I remember Gary driving me back home once, you know. He says, this is the new single. And he showed me this picture disc, you know, of Our Friends Electric, and I was like, yeah, you know, sort of, yeah, it's very good. No, it was good, but I mean, I was just, I suppose I was quite jealous, really, you know. And next minute, it was absolutely massive thing, you know, it was absolutely huge, ridiculous. And so I was, because I was on tour. The thing is, what was good about Gary was he openly said, I'm influenced by Ultravox, and did really a lot for us, you know. It was almost a bit like trying not getting Ultravox back together after that. Because, I mean, I was doing a job, but I wasn't used to doing a job, even though I enjoyed it, you know. It was actually a nice change to not have that much responsibility, you know, because there was more responsibility I found from being in your own band, you know, than just turning up and... I don't mean that in any disrespect at all. I mean, it was a very exciting time, all that. The Visage thing was coming together. Before I went on tour, we did Tar. We did the first single. And we did that with Martin Rushent, who again was looking to get in on the act. We could tell that things were changing. He'd got tired of producing the Stranglers and just wanted a change. And he'd moved into this house, huge house, made a lot of money there, down near Reading, swimming pool, the whole business. And there was a prefab house in the gardens, and he just literally just plonked all his gear in there, you know, and wired it up. And it had an MCI desk which we'd just been working on, which was at Connie Plank's studio in Germany. We did Sisters of Romance on that, so that was good. I was quite au fait with the desk. And we went and did Tar, and we put it out on his own label, Radar Records, which did sort of nothing really, not got a little bit of play. But I mean, to just before we started properly with doing Visage, which is in the middle of summer at Martin's studio. This is I was doing keyboards in the living room, you know, we'd do a bit of vocals in the bathroom. I mean, you're not talking high-tech studio here, but it was a deal, it's a production deal, you know, you get the time up front. And also when I was on tour with Gary Newman, Ced Sharpley and Chris Payne, we were up on these big towers. Don't know if you see pictures from that tour, you know. And in the sound checks, they were doing this thing. I quite liked the Mini Moog, which was a big feature for Gary's stuff. Like the main melody of Cars is a Poly Moog. I think they weren't all that used at the time because they were an absolute fortune, you know, they were about £6,000 or something. Synthesizers were expensive then. And yeah, but just to cut a long story short, they were playing this thing and I liked it. And we started working on it in the sound check. And I took them in to do a demo at Martin Rushent's studio in the middle of the tour. And that was the backing track for Fade to Grey, you know, because they when we were short of tracks when we were doing the Visage album later on that year. And I brought that one in, and you know, that was the main. Well, that was a big hit for Visage. You know.
How did sorry, I'll just stop you there. I just need to.
Oh no, it's a squeaky thing.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. So just tell us a little bit about that.
I think a lot of people will think, well, God, he had a good enough chance, but it was kind of the climate, you know. We didn't get a proper smell of it because of the punk thing had just had a stranglehold over everything, and so we're about to be dropped. And like I say, we'd just done special guests at the Reading Festival to the Jam. Paul Weller used to come to our gigs a lot. We'd done 5 nights at the Marquee, sold out. You know, we were like, hey, you know, big news here. And then we were just dropped, you know, and so it was a right downer. And Richard Griffiths, this guy who helped us. Who liked us, liked the music, helped us a lot. Worked for Ireland at the time. He got us a last gig we did in that lineup in Britain at the Marquee on Christmas Eve, exactly 20 years ago. And so he's dishing out the money afterwards in the backstage, and it's £100 or something. And we're aware that we're like a lot in debt, and we're also at the time wondering whether we're going to get our gear back. But Ireland, they're okay, you know. I mean, Christ, we just went and got it. So that was that, you know, and then Rusty was around there, Rusty Egan, and he just said, do you fancy coming around to this club? I've got a club around the corner called Billy's Club, strange name, and it's like 50 yards. It was like fine. We were pretty apathetic, but not that apathetic to just walk round there, and just got blasted really on these blue cocktail drinks, and it was just a vibe to listen to. He was playing Quiet Man, which was brilliant, just to hear it out of a live gig and in a club. I thought it was good actually, you know. I've enjoyed dance music myself, you know, and nice to. It was a bit like he's going against the flow. We've just been going against the flow, and look what's happened to us. And also, I knew he'd just been dropped from with the rich kids, and he was playing Bowie, Kraftwerk, Ultravox, and you know, it was like the start of it was just fun. At the time, it just seemed like, oh, this is nice, you know. Because Bowie was doing some good stuff. I actually like Lodger, which came out right in the middle of, that's my favourite album. So it was like a meeting of like a scene.
And what about, I mean, when was Visage broached? When was that?
Pretty quickly, really. I mean, you know, this is what I quite liked about someone like Rusty Egan and also Midge. It was like, come on, let's just get on with it, you know. So before I knew it, we were doing our first single, you know, they talked about having the magazine guys in, and I was dead keen because I liked magazine. Like I said, we crossed paths in these constant European tours that we were doing, you know. If you aren't going to do well in England, pack them off to Europe. So I knew about the magazine, and I was it was just great, really good fun, doing it with good musicians. Barry Adamson on bass, really good bass player. And it was interesting having a keyboard player like Dave Formula, comes from a totally different side, jazz. His father was a jazz musician. So before I knew it, we banged out Tar, the first single, you know.
Martin Rushton was quite a key producer at the time. Obviously, you mentioned a little bit about his recording studios in Berkshire, but he went on to do some stuff with the Human League. What was your impressions of him?
Of Martin? Well, the most impression was us pushing him out of his own studio, which I've just thought about that just recently, and I thought, Christ, I think we should have let him in, because he was just there soaking it all up, you know, and we were just cocky bastards, you know, we wouldn't even let him in his own studio. And he was just there, he was just waiting in the wings, ready to do his own thing after we'd gone, and he did.
And what about, and tell us a little bit about that time, again, you know, the chronology is a little bit complicated. Met Rusty, went round to Billy's. When did you meet Steve Strange?
Good point. I think Steve was there, lurking around. He did some of the DJing. I mean, basically this whole movement thing was DJ-led. I mean, it really was. It had been saturated, the live club scene. It had really been saturated, and that's good, actually. I enjoyed it. I think playing live was great for me to learn. And they decided to just take it away from that. And so these guys were two DJs, and so the whole thing was definitely DJ-led. You know, Steve was there playing records as well.
And Steve, I mean, you said, you know, he was a doorman. Rusty played the sounds, and you know, between them, they kind of set up this whole new scene. Is that how you saw it?
Yeah, definitely. It was a while before they moved from Billy's to get into the Blitz place. It was really when we got to the Blitz place. I mean, Billy's was a bit of a dive. I mean, and it was more of a scene that really captured the atmosphere, the vibe more at the Blitz, you know, in Covent Garden, which was later on that year.
And what about Steve? You know, when you meet somebody like Steve, he was a very, you know, dramatic, kind of out there type of guy. What was he like?
He was quite a shy guy. You know, I mean, the guys that he was interested in what was going on. I think he felt a little bit on the spot because he'd got to put vocals on this music, and it seems to be, at that time we'd do the music first and the vocals would go on last. I think sometimes he was a bit nervous about it. He was a nice bloke, sensitive guy. And I mean, one of the fondest memories I've actually got about it was that basically the first sessions I did, especially in summer, I'd spend most of my time laughing at Rusty and Midge arguing, you know. It was just like these two, you know, Scots guy and a Cockney, you know, like. But it was all in good humour. And me and Steve just laughed, basically, you know. Steve was a funny guy.
How did Midge come on board?
Well, Midge had been working with the Rich Kids, wasn't he? He was in the Rich Kids, and he was mates with Rusty, so he was in there as well. And also, Midge is definitely a practical sort of guy. You know, he was definitely lined up to sort of help Steve, I think, really, the bottom line, on the vocals. He's supportive and, you know, it was sort of... he's a hard worker, is Midge, you know, and he would make him get things done. And like I say, at first that was quite good humoured, you know.
What was your impression of Midge when you first met him? What was your...
Bossy little git? No, I'm completely joking. No, he was a practical, enthusiastic guy and helped lift me up out of my apathy that I'd gotten into, you know, that there's life after, and so did Rusty. And so did Steve, you know, they were good blokes, you know. And you've got the more serious personalities with Magazine, so in some ways we were kind of a bit rubbing shoulders now, you know. But then we all had a laugh. I mean, Barry Adamson is a funny guy, you know.
Did you see yourself as musicians on Visage, or was it part of a band, or was the band Steve and Rusty? Or?
No, it was a full band. It was a big band, 7 of us. It's a bit hard to remember. No, it was I didn't see it as a band the same as what I'd just been involved in, but in some ways that was quite a relief. It was nice to just do something. We weren't session guys because we were all writers, and that was nice to be a writer in a different circumstances, not enhancing a songwriter. But it wasn't always like that with John Foxx, because sometimes I would originate things that he would go from, but it was quite often originating a songwriter's idea. Sorry, not originating, extending. So we were all writers, so we were all there to just put things into the pot and see what we could come up with. So it was a band, yeah. It was a different band, different kind of band from what I'd been used to.
And was Steve kind of like the art director, or what was his role? I mean, I know you're saying both, but...
I think Rusty, and when it gets down to the image of it, it was definitely Steve and Rusty that was more into that, with Midge, I think, as well. And because they had a whole thing, I mean, there was things coming through at that time, like PX, which was a shop there in Covent Garden, which had been doing punk stuff. They'd been doing the S&M gear and all that, you know. And then all of a sudden that suddenly changed to slightly space things. I mean, it's quite interesting at this time that the new romantic term hadn't come up at all. That came up in like early 1981. It was futurist, and that kind of came through this kind of stuff that PX were creating, because it was Rusty who instigated that kind of thing. I mean, I've got a very interesting memory, because we did the whistle test as part of our promotion that year. And I remember, because we were just like guys that just used to irritate people because our hair was a bit longer, or we just looked like we didn't really care. You know, a bit like Japan. It was, you know, our John was doing the European man bit a bit then. And I remember Rusty saying to me, "Nice T-shirt." In other words, you know, why didn't you make an effort? So when I remember doing the whistle test with Gary Newman, Kensington Market, and get these black suits and ties, remember that? It had rubbed off on me, you see. I was a bossy little so-and-so telling them what to wear. It was important, all this, you know, it really was. I mean, Gary was looking to me to dress them, which I did. But I remember Rusty and Midge turning up at the whistle test when I did the Gary Newman thing. So if you ever see that Gary Newman thing, which is shown quite a lot, they're all wearing these jackets and ties and stuff, you know, 2 coloured ties, you know, all organised. And you look up at the top there, and I've got this great PX thing on, you know, shoulders out to about here, and it's like, hey, you know, black suit and white line down here. It's a crossover. Futurist was an extension of punk, but it's important, I think, to mention that, because we quite related to that. Ultravox did later on that year, because we'd got out of our apathy, and it was like thinking a bit like technology and almost like a spiritual side of it coming into the music, you know. Which was really not where punk was at.
How long was it after the break with John? Obviously, you mentioned you did the Ultravox and Gary stuff. How long was it before you invited Midge to come and, you know, board?
I mean, you've got to laugh at this now, because I mean, I just want us not having any of it at all. It was like, I'm doing Visage, I'm enjoying this, you know, I just don't want to know about it. But Rusty was quite pushy, and it was like, I enjoyed working with him. I mean, I keep saying it was a laugh, but it really was a laugh. You know, it was. So later on that year, I invited Midge to meet the other guys. It was in August, you know, when we'd done we hadn't done the Visage album, but we'd had a good crack at it, and it was time to sort of do something with it, you know, like do something with those demos, you know. So it was like invited Midge along in August, met the other guys, just near Island actually, a pub just around the corner. Because Chris Cross fixed us up to go into, his lady worked at Island, and so we wangled going in there to rehearse. So our first rehearsals were at the Labour were just being kicked off.
So after that, why did you think? Did Midge say I want to join the band?
Midge was quite no messing. You know, you were talking about guys that would just say what they felt. You know, which I thought was quite good after Ultravox, because we'd got a bit sort of thinking what's happening with Ultravox, Bill? You know. And then it was like later on in the year, it was like, what's happening with Ultravox? You know, we could do something. You know, and I didn't milk it or anything, but I mean, I just didn't want to talk about it. You know, and then. He was just dead straightforward. We could do something with it. I could see after working on the Visage stuff, I liked the way Midge was a pretty organised guy, you know, and he worked at the similar speed to me, and I liked that. Good, strong voice, and I watched the way he organised the vocals, and from that I thought it was a perfect opportunity for me to just see whether it was going to work or not with Ultravox, you know. It's good to see how he worked.
What did you say to the other guys in the band?
Blunt Scottish accent. Hello, I'm Midge. You know.
I mean, did you say I've met this guy called Midge who's going to be our new vocalist?
Oh, sorry. What did I say?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just being stupid now. Yeah, I talked to them. You know, but I've been doing so much that year that I think they're a bit reluctant to answer the phone. Now, no, I'm getting bitchy now, aren't I? No, they were up for it. I think they were. I mean, to be honest, Midge and Chris wondered what the hell what was going to happen, you know, and they were quite pleased that I'd done this. Sounds big-headed, doesn't it? But there was a lot of things happening, and I was getting on with things. And when I talked to Warren and Chris, they were like, I don't want to paint a bad picture here, but I think they were, oh yeah, this sounds really good, you know.
Warren and Chris were impressed with what you were doing.
Yeah. No, I'm just saying that it's because I was doing a lot of stuff. I think they was probably quite glad to hear from me.
But
big-headed bastard.
I mean, Ultravox then, as you say, you didn't want to talk about it, and other people were kind of
saying how good it was, you know.
Yeah. Tell the people that. I mean, to explain a little.
Well, that was just too weird, you know. To have a different point of view of it, because we were right in the middle of it. It's always like this with people making records and stuff. You're right in the thick of it. And you can handle that when you're doing it, because you're doing it. But when you're not doing it, and have someone else tell you that you really like this, it's quite odd. That's all I can say. It's a really odd thing. So I was immediately getting on with Visage, even though it was a much fun, lighter project. I was satisfying. In fact, I used some of the ideas that were rejected for the Systems of Romance album on it, like the intro of Mind of a Toy was a kind of a spacey, rotating instrumental I did, all these instrumentals. So I was getting some release of what I was doing, but well, it just makes you look at it, I think, at the end and realise that you had got something new. Because it had a big effect on me, and I think it has a big effect on musicians when you dropped, because you feel like a bloody failure, you know. And it's when people, in the end, after a bit of space, especially people like the Simple Minds guys saying they liked it, because I liked some of their stuff, you know, you tend to think, well, it made me think that we'd really got something. As me, Warren and Chris, you know, we've got something.
And in Visage, you know, Midge was on guitar, Steve was singing. How did it come about? Did you invite Midge to sing, or how did that relationship work?
In Ultravox? Yeah, I did. I mean, I just said, come on, let's give it a crack. I mean, it's a bit of a blurred memory, that, but I seem to remember, I remember when we were in the studio at Martin Russian's, Midge had learnt, this is how practical he was, and he sang Quiet Man and stuff. And so he made me realise that we could knit the two together, and it wouldn't be such a case of going in and writing a whole album, because I think I'd got a little bit befuddled into that. It was a case of, we could do these good tracks that people are rating now, like Slow Motion, Quiet Man, or we even did Dislocation. and we could do it like that, you know, just by playing it to me. And that was interesting because it just showed that it could work as a guitarist and singer. Actually, yeah, I'm just remembering, that was actually one of the things that I wasn't too sure about, coming down to a 4-piece, you know. And that's what he did. He played them, showed his ability to be able to do that and sing. He's a practical guy, Midge. He was good, you know. He worked hard, you know. So when we went and rehearsed together, I mean, it was just a case of doing a few mid-tempo tracks that worked quite well, that seemed to come out quite quickly. And Midge had an important influence on those, like New Europeans and these mid-tempo things, Private Lives. And we actually touched on, am I racing ahead now? We touched on an electronic thing with Mr. X, where there was no guitar. And that was brilliant because, you see, because we were racing and all going so fast at that time, it really was like that. I then fixed us up with a manager because I realised that was a lot of our problems was because we were manager-less through the whole island thing, even though we were helped like people like Richard Griffiths. But, you know, I really saw that was a mistake. We need a manager, you know, someone. So I got on the phone and I'd been hustling for a manager when we had Systems of Romance. I talked to the Who's manager, I talked to, oh we did, I can't remember. But I mean, the Who's manager was like, yeah. But anyway, there was another guy I was going to talk to, and that was Chris Morrison, Thin Lizzy's manager, and he was up for it straight away. And he picked up the tempo of the whole thing. He was also interested in Visage, he was interested in Ultravox. And it was a case of, we want to do it like this. And it was like, right, let's do it then. So we wanted to get out of this country, because Midge was a bit sensitive about what had just happened to him with the rich kids. So he wanted to get out of this country. And me and Warren were interested in the States, having just been there. So Chris Morrison organised for us to go do quite a biggish tour, a club tour in the States, because we knew you could go to clubs and use their PA, which is actually quite a new thing that Miles Copeland had organised earlier that year. So you haven't got the baggage, and it's not expensive. So that's what we did. We did these few mid-tempo tracks, electronic tracks, reworked some of the old stuff, and we got a set very quickly and beggared off to America over Christmas. We did 12 nights at the Whiskey A Go-Go over the New Year and some other places up and down the West Coast. And we did quite a lot. We went back there again as well. So we came back from that. And when we started rehearsing again, we expected things to happen immediately. We were very much like that. CBS were interested when CBS was. But I remember starting rehearsing again. This is quite a fond memory. Freezing in bloody February up at Easy Eye, just off Caledonian Road. And it was peculiar. Again, it's amazing how these things happen. The guy from CBS came in and listened to us. And that was the day we were writing Vienna. And I instigated Vienna. Yep. I walked in and said, it's time we're right to do a ballad. Let's do a ballad. And instead of everybody going, you know, yep, we'll do a ballad, because we've got 3-4 mid-tempo tracks under our belt. We messed with the electronic thing. And it's like this, it's in this key. We'll do this sparse verse as similar to, you know, not just Warren and Chris knew what I was talking about, so did Midge. I mean, he liked Ultravox, you know. He knew Systems of Romance. So we've got this sparse beginning. And it was dead funny because the guy from CBS was there as well. But we were so impatient and really like go for it types, you know. It's like aspiring, you know, we want it now. That we just weren't even interested, you know. It's like, because he said to us, we can, I like what you do, but let's just see how you develop over the next 6 months. This is what I'm saying, this is what I'm trying to say. And our attitude was like, we might not be together next week, pal. You know, it was, you know, things have to happen now, and so, you know, that was great. It was the way we got Vienna together. It was just like fresh, and it was the right time to do it. You know.
Because the album had the same name, yeah.
Pardon?
The album had the same. It was called Vienna as well.
Yeah.
Why was that? Why did you call the album?
I don't know actually.
So I heard it was going to be called like.
I think it was Chris Wright who demanded that it should be called Vienna. We had some titles when we came back and finished the album, and we were just arguing about it all the time. And we met at the McDonald's on opposite Centre Point. I remember this, and we were still arguing. You know, we really did actually have the ump with each other after that album, because we did it out in Germany, and we had quite a bit of disagreements. It was all very intense, and we've got all these titles, and I ended up winning. I came up with this title. There's a few album copies of these, and it's embarrassing that I even thought of this now. You know, I won't even tell you. And when Chris Wright saw it, he said, "No, I want Vienna," and we thought, yeah, we just needed someone else to tell us, I think. But we just yeah, thanks. We just you need someone else sometime, you know. And Chris Morrison and Chris O'Donnell, who manages Van Morrison now, they kept out of it. This is the kind of people we were, you know. But also, it's like Vienna was. Why should we call it Vienna? It just didn't seem anything to us, that track, you know, to start banging on about that. It was, again, we were still working on a spectrum with Ultravox, where we did this, rock tracks, electronic tracks, and that happened to be a sort of a ballady thing, which was a bit weird, you know. And so it wasn't like it was a major thing for us. That it was a big surprise that it was a hit, you know.
Yeah, I'll come back to
Yeah.
that. But, I mean, tell us a little bit about Sleepwalk, which was the first kind of single you released.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the first ones we wrote when we got together. That's actually, I think that is the very first one we wrote. And I mean, you can see the influences straight away. It was just very, very easy. Less hassle as possible. We didn't get too intense, it was deliberately. I mean, it's anthemic, the chorus, care of my bit. And it had the chugging thing, which had become identifiable, or was about to, but we hadn't done much of that, you know, the triggered mini Moog. But I think it was also quite humorous, because we were feeling more like that, you know. Don't let's be too serious here, poor-faced about it, although we were. No, and so we put the chubby checker rock and roll drums in thing, which we'd actually used once before on a track called Rock Rock in 1977, which was a single. And so it was done very quickly, and the vocals, Midge he just seemed to bang them out. So it was, I think it was, the key was to not labour over it too much, which Midge influenced it like that. He didn't want to get too deep sometimes, Midge, and I think that was actually quite a positive thing at that time, you know.
So just elaborate a little bit more about how, when you're talking about the singles, or even the whole album again, how did the writing process, you know, evolve in the Ultravox, the new Ultravox?
The new Ultravox, well, me and Midge had hand writing together when we were doing Visage. It was we had to make sure that the lines didn't get too blurred. They did do a bit the following year, because we had to do 2 albums in 1 year, with belated quite big success of the 2 projects, you know. Because I remember Midge saying, "Oh well, I'll be famous as a lead singer with Ultravox, or I might be just the man at the back in Visage," you know. But they both took off. But basically, it was a case of I realised that I could work with Midge, and we worked pretty much at the same speed, you know, quite fast. And Warren and Chris were just clued in, you know. Me and Warren and Chris had worked together for so long together, and but I mean, you know, at times like this, 10 years down the line, 10 years, yeah, you've got to say again. I mean, I had a lot to do with the writing of the musical side of stuff, you know. I didn't take any care of the lyrics at all, and Midge had a partner in crime on that one. That was Chris. He was quite good at coming up with images and things that appealed to Midge, so he helped out in that one. And quite often Warren used to just concentrate on his drums, and we were happy about that. We split it equal. It's democratic, and which is good. I think it was the only way. After what we'd been through, picking and poking around songs, you know. Democratic, and Warren really just used to concentrate on his drums, and that was fine, because it really had a very, very important part of the whole movement. A lot of it, the drum side of it, was very important, you know.
2 things.
Technology and all that.
Just about to run out of the cassette. Just go.
All right. Fine. But I'll talk about Vienna first up.
Yep.
Okay, sorry about that. Do you mind?
It's okay.
Happy chaps and
Yep.
Okay, obviously, Sleepwalk, number 29,
Yeah.
broke into the top 40, job done to a degree, but then
Yeah.
Vienna went, how did...
That was
first-
actually depended whether we got the deal at Chrysalis.
Tell us a little bit about, just first up, and you mentioned it, it's a little bit earlier, but go back to how did Vienna come about, the actual song.
It was the second album we'd done with the producer Connie Plank, and Connie Plank had come and seen us even as far back as 1977 and built a relationship with us and got into our music in the tougher, acid, hard stuff that we were doing then, and some of it really was. And he could produce that kind of stuff, but he was also very much into the other stuff we were doing as well. We did a track on Systems of Romance called Just for a Moment, which is very sparse, where we recorded the vocals outside with the sound of the birds tweetering in the background, And when we did Vienna, he was just with us all the time, and we actually did write Vienna, but with nothing much going on in the middle section. I was a suspect hippie, by the way. I never really lost that. So I used to improvise through it. I always believe that if you do an album, you should have these things. You should be able to improvise, and a lot of my solos had that. I like to keep that edge about it. This is this futurist thing. It was in touch with technology, but a spiritual sort of positivity going on as well. And when we were doing that, we did it without in the middle section. We did it at Camden. Like I said, this is where we got the record deal from. I'm digressing. So I asked the guys to just back off and let me concentrate on that middle section, and amazingly they did. All very strong characters, which is good. So we did that, and so I was in the enviable position of filling in the middle section, and it was really exciting. We're talking. We still didn't have any money. I remember borrowing the violin to do it. We laid it all down at Rack Studios in St John's Wood, and Connie was the kind of guy that would let us use the acoustics. He would experiment with the acoustics, like I did the violin for it in the doorway as you come in, because it was like marble and glass. And I remember us sending out the drums down into the basement bit as well. He used to experiment to get an overall ambience, which was all very important to him towards a song. And I can't really talk to you about the lyrics because he was very private with that, with Midge, but he did influence that. And the term Vienna came up because when I was doing it's not just me, all of us we were doing. But when I was trying to get a feeling for the middle section, he started going on about, why don't you overblow it? Why don't you make it seem like decaying decadence, which was at a time of the Habsburg thing? History, but it kind of rang a bell. And he talked to me, because his father was a viola player, played in an orchestra, and he knew I'd had a lot of music history slung down my neck at college. So he said, Richard Strauss, right, this is a guy called Max Reger, who he used to play records to feel as if it was what's going on, which was good to try and get us into what he meant. So for me, he played this guy called Max Reger, and what he meant was that when Richard Strauss, the man, left, he did an exit stage right because things were just weird. Things were going wrong. There was just a climate in the society was going downhill. So enter stage left this chancer called Max Reger. And now this is where the crux of the thing, And he says, now listen to this and you'll see what I mean. And it was overblown, over-embellished, arpeggio city, and it made you want to puke. And we thought, that's interesting. It's this Austrian, and it was kind of... So he influenced all of us to play it in almost like overplayed. But I was like that anyway with that one, I didn't need much help. So like when you play the violin, it's like, really sing it, which was alien to us because I hadn't been doing that. I'd almost been avoiding the classical thing by trying to be accepted, in other words, playing the Fender violin and just getting it through people's heads. as loud as possible, even getting feedback and stuff. So this was an interesting, he just gave us an angle on it. And then of course out come the cymbals, you know, if you're going to get overblown. And but that was nice. I mean, I had control over that. I didn't write all the music. Chris Cross had a very influential part to move into the chorus key change. But I remember when we were writing, I mean, of course, Connie influenced Midge in the lyrics around the idea of Vienna. So that's where that comes from. And but I just remember that track. You can always you get these moments when you write things. We started in this key, and it went into another key, blah blah blah, which happened to be the fourth, but it sounded like it was going down. I mean, it's really weird. And then, so we were going on the chorus. It goes around between chord 4 and 5, and blah blah blah. You know, I mean, chord 4, 5 is like 12 bar, you know, with a little bit of a sixth chord in minor. This is it, and then it resolves down onto F, which is God, I've got it wrong. I wrote the bloody thing. No, it starts actually on the 5th chord. Sorry about this, and then it goes down, goes down to the 4th, and then it goes between 4th and the minor. Oh, Vienna, right, brilliant. And so we thought, oh, yeah, that sounds quite good, because Chris had strength, played, he was a bass guitarist, so it's like mini Moog, you know, like strong. Dun, 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 dun. Great. But then the thing was, when we came back to C, which was the 5th, to start the verse again, I must say that was quite mind-blowing. It was like, shit, we've got something here. The way it was just elevated, you know, to actually start the second verse on the 5th, because it was always like very up. It's quite up, you know. Oh, stuff like that is quite mind-blowing. You just wonder, because usually when you do a chorus, what I'm saying is, it's like, now what's the beginning bit going to sound like, you know? It's like, and then you go, oh, it sounds crap, and then you start having to go through this whole process. But this seemed to work, you know. It was just one of those that worked instantly. Like I say, I was lucky to have the time, because, like I said, we were all very intense people at that time, to just get the guys to just back off, and I did the middle section and came up with a slowing down to the last chorus, and Midge did an interesting contribution, which was the cello line. I had to tell him what notes to play, though. No, but I think the actual cello line, doom, 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 is a very important part of it. Yeah. But it was just good. It's inspired.